Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining tonight's Tuesday Talks webinar. My name is Susan Brown, and I am the Associate Director of Family Programs. It is a pleasure to be hosting tonight's webinar on the topic of healthy decisions, talking with your student about alcohol and drugs. Joining me tonight is Abby Mazzeo. She's a licensed independent clinical social worker and Senior Assistant Director of the Office of Prevention and Education at Northeastern, also known as OPEN. Thank you, Abby, for joining us tonight. So Abby is going to give a presentation, and then following the presentation, we will invite you to type questions into the Q&A pod, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. So let's get started.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Abby. Hey.
How are you?
Thank you.
Again, my name is Abby, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. I work at OPEN, the Office of Prevention and Education at Northeastern, and like Susan said, I am a clinical social worker. So I'm really excited for you all to be here tonight and to share some points about talking to your students about alcohol and other drugs, and especially sharing how you all can be partners in prevention with the work that our office does on campus. So these are just some of the things that we're going to start talking about tonight. We're going to begin with alcohol and marijuana's impact on college students, and then we're going to talk about what students get when they come to our office. We're then going to talk about how substances, including alcohol and marijuana, affect the body and how students can reduce their risks. And then we're going to talk about you all as parents and families, how you can partner with our office to talk to students about reducing their risks and preventing additional risks. And then finally, we're going to wrap up with resources. So to start, we're going to talk about alcohol and marijuana's impact on college students. Before I get started, I do always tell parents that just because I'm talking about alcohol and marijuana today doesn't mean that I assume that your student or any students are using alcohol or marijuana. We're going to talk in a little bit, in a couple slides, about what the normative data that we have about Northeastern students, specifically the percentage of students that we know who are making the decision to use alcohol or other drugs. But if your student is here making the decision not to drink or use other substances, please know that they're not the only one making that choice. So first, what do we know about how alcohol does impact college students, and why are we so invested in prevention work on this topic? We do know that college can be the heaviest time period in a student's life, specifically around drinking. So there can be this assumption that, well, it's no big deal, or other people are doing it more than me, right? But we do know that alcohol does have impact on college students, and research would suggest that it specifically impacts students' quality of sleep. It can be associated with lower likelihood of being engaged with faculty, and can be associated with lower GPA. Other consequences that we hear from students can be blackouts, physical injuries after being intoxicated, getting into accidents or fights, unwanted or regretted sex, and conduct violations. So these are all reasons that we are so invested in work on this topic, because we know it can impact college students negatively. So we also know that marijuana can impact college students, and we specifically know through research that marijuana use can be associated with lower GPA, and is also associated often with taking longer to graduate, and potentially even likelihood of still being enrolled throughout a student's time at a university. And we know that a lot of parents are potentially playing a role in paying for tuition or paying for books, whatever that happens to be. And so if you are helping your student with any type of payment throughout this process, we know that it's really important for you and your student to continue to stay enrolled. So that is one of the risks that we talk to students about when it comes to marijuana use, and how students can reduce their risk if they're making the decision to smoke. So like I said, we know that alcohol and marijuana can impact college students, specifically around academics. But why this work can be really difficult is because it's really hard to engage students around noticing how alcohol or marijuana use can impact their academics. So as you can see on this slide, stress, anxiety, and sleep difficulties are by far the top 3 things that students endorse when they're thinking about what interferes with their academics. When we have when we have conversations with students about, hey, how might alcohol or other drug use impact your academics? Usually students say, no, that's not really something that I'm concerned about. So it's our job to really think about how alcohol and drug use can increase stress, can impact anxiety, and specifically around sleep. And I'm going to share some information with you all in a couple slides about how those things can be impacted by alcohol or drug use to try to make that connection for students. We're trying to make that connection with them on campus, but as our partners in prevention, we encourage you all to talk to your students about those potential connections that they might not automatically see right off the bat. So taking a closer look on how alcohol and marijuana use can impact academic success, I want to talk to you about this specific study which we talked to parents about that specifically followed students for 8 years. So it's a longitudinal study that showed that not only are there immediate effects when it comes to consequences around alcohol or other drug use, but that those immediate effects can cascade into other longer-term interrelated problems that actually tend to accumulate over time. So some of the things in the immediate present, if students are using alcohol or other drugs, would be maybe spending less time studying or potentially having a lower GPA due to spending less time studying. But we know that that could actually, in the long term, set the stage for disruptions in college enrollment and greater likelihood of delayed graduation or even failure to graduate. So we know that even short-term impacts, alcohol or other drug use, do have these really longer-term outcomes that could potentially even extend beyond college graduation in the form of either poor employment opportunities or lower lifetime earnings. So these are things that we talk to students about. Hey, some of these consequences you may be seeing right now, but we want to talk to students and families about how some of these consequences really last longer than some of the things that they're seeing in the immediate moment to try to reduce risk now and also in the future. So I think there's also this myth that I hear all the time that, well, I'm not worried about my own substance use because other people are always doing it more than me, right? I don't drink that much. Other people are the ones that you should be worried about. And we talk to students about that common myth because it actually does impact behavior. So people are influenced by what they believe is happening with their friends or others. But those perceptions are often very inaccurate. So what we try to do at Open and what I'd love to share with you all tonight is that if we can correct some of those misperceptions, that can go a long way with students in helping them change how they're thinking about what other students are doing. This is where you all can play a really big role too, right? We know that if students think other people are drinking more or smoking more, that their use actually does increase as well. So as our partners in prevention, we really encourage you to share this data that we have of Northeastern students to let your student know that, hey, not everyone on campus is drinking or using other drugs. In fact, we know that 30% of Northeastern students have not used alcohol at all in the last month, and that the vast majority of Northeastern students, 76%, are not using marijuana at all in the past 30 days. So it's important that if your student may have a misperception about what's going on at Northeastern, that you can talk to them about correcting that so they have a sense of what is actually going on campus. And if they're making the decision not to drink or not to use other substances, know that they're not alone in that decision as well. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what our office provides to students who come through our door at Open. So we know that there's this traditional just say no message, right? I had DARE when I was in middle school, and that was really a just say no message around alcohol or other drugs. But our office is a little bit different than what students might expect when they're walking through the door. So we're actually not a just say no office. We're a harm reduction office. So what that means is that we really use messaging to make sure that we're not just dismissing students who may have questions or concerns by saying, well, just say no, just don't drink or use other substances. We're not a just say yes program either, so I always make that clear with parents and students in that we do acknowledge legality, and we acknowledge the student code of conduct here on campus and how students are held to that code of conduct. But we really want to have an open, non-judgmental conversation with students who walk through our door, because we find that just shutting down the conversation isn't helpful, and it doesn't reduce student risks if they do have questions or concerns about what their own use is, if they're too afraid to even have an honest conversation. So we're really proud of the reputation that we have as a harm reduction, risk reduction office, and we find that students really relate a lot to our non-judgmental attitude and open up to us so that we can have realistic conversations about how they can reduce their risk. So this is what our office does. Most students who come to our office do so after having an incident that occurs on or off campus regarding alcohol or other drugs. So what we provide is an evidence-based gold standard intervention. It's a brief model, and we have an assessment meeting and a feedback meeting with students. And basically, we just ask them what's going on for them, what questions or concerns they have, and we use something called motivational interviewing to enhance a student's desire to make changes. So to either reduce their risk or to take a break from whatever it is that they happen to be doing if that feels what's right for them and what's best for them. A cool thing is our office provides Skype meetings. So students don't even have to be in the city or in the country to be meeting with us and to kind of address some of the questions and concerns that they might have. So we always encourage students, just email us at open@northeastern.edu. You can also email us at open@northeastern.edu if you have additional questions or concerns. And our website has so much information. So we often send students to our website if they want to learn more, and we encourage parents to use our website too. That's studentlife.northeastern.edu/open. And students can visit us on campus at 307 L Hall. So my favorite thing to talk to students and families about is how substances affect the body and how students can use that information to reduce their risk. So that's what we're going to spend a little bit of time today talking about right now. So we talk to students about standard drinks right off the bat. A lot of students that I speak to are like, yeah, I got that information in high school, and many students have. So if students do have some background of alcohol or other drug education, that's great. If not, these are some of the things that we share, right? A standard drink is equal to a ½ ounce of ethyl alcohol. The guy in this picture does not have a standard drink in his hand, right? And so we talk to students about really being cautious about if you are making the decision to drink, to keep in mind what a standard drink is, so that because the only way that you can know how intoxicated you are is to know how many standard drinks you've consumed. These would be examples of standard drinks. So 12 ounces of beer, 8 to 10 ounces of malt liquor, something like Mike's Hard Lemonade or Smirnoff Ice or Twisted Tea. 4 to 5 ounces of wine is a standard drink. And if you're looking at hard alcohol, something that's 80 proof, a standard drink would be a shot or 1.5 ounces. So proof definitely matters. We talk to students about if they are drinking something that is higher proof. A standard drink could even be less than 1 shot. And the only way to know how intoxicated you're getting, like I mentioned, is to know that you're consuming a standard drink if you are making the decision to drink. So we also talk to students about how to calculate their blood alcohol content. So basically, the reason I'm talking to you about this information too is so you can feel better equipped to talk to your students if they do have questions and have that conversation. So these are the things that we talk to students about. What impacts their BAC? What impacts how intoxicated they're getting? So how long they're drinking over, how much they weigh, how many standard drinks they've consumed, and what their birth sex is. So just to give you an example, birth sex definitely matters. So if we take the same 5 drinks over 3 hours, for example, a 160-pound male, not only is that male a higher weight than his female counterpart, but males do have a couple things that will always make them less intoxicated than a female counterpart at the same standard drinks over the same amount of hours. That's due to just hormones in the female's body. And also males have this enzyme in their stomach that is called alcohol dehydrogenase. It's a really cool enzyme in that it breaks down some of that alcohol and releases it from a male system even before that enters their bloodstream. So males, like we talk to students about all the time, will always feel less intoxicated than females. And so it's important to know, hey, if you're going drink for drink with a female friend or with a male friend, know that your experience can be really different than the experiences of those around you. And that's another way that we talk to students about really how they can reduce their risk and just be more aware of other people in the community and how to take care of each other. So these are just examples of BAC charts that we share with Northeastern students. So that green zone we talk to students as being the least risky zone if they do make the decision to drink. That's where you're going to be feeling buzzed. We talk to students about as soon as you leave that 0.05 range and are higher than a 0.06, that's when alcohol is going to switch over. It starts to become a depressant, and the higher your BAC is, the more impaired you're going to be feeling, and the more of those depressant effects will be kicking in. So there are a couple things that affect how alcohol gets absorbed into your system. What you're drinking. The more potent something is that you're drinking, the faster that you're going to feel the effects, as well as rate of consumption. The faster you drink, the faster you're going to feel the effects as well. Also effervescence. So this is always something that really surprises students, and I actually didn't know before I started working here as well. But if you're drinking something really bubbly, champagne for example, those bubbles actually break down your stomach lining and allow alcohol to enter faster. So that's why if students aren't used to drinking champagne, but let's say on New Year's, maybe they tried champagne for the first time, they might feel much more intoxicated just because they're drinking something that's effervescent. And these are all things that we can just kind of educate students about to make sure that if they are making the decision to drink, that they're choosing something that they know they have the most control over and feel most comfortable with. And then finally, food makes a huge difference. So food acts like a giant sponge in your stomach. It's going to soak up that alcohol and release it really slowly into your system. So we always talk to students about, hey, the slower that alcohol enters your system, the more control you have over your night. And so always wanting to start your night, if you do make the decision to drink, on a full stomach. Sobering up. So this is the greatest thing that I ask students about. What makes you sober up? I hear all kinds of myths. Some students say drinking a lot of coffee, running around in circles, doing exercise, getting some fresh air, taking a cold shower. These are all things that I hear all the time from students about, yep, that's going to sober me up. But when we talk to students about sobering up, there is only one thing that actually works to sober you up, and that's time. I think that it can take a lot longer than students actually might realize. If you fall asleep with a BAC at 0.08, that's the legal limit to drive a vehicle if you are over the age of 21 in Massachusetts. Let's say you fall asleep at midnight with a BAC. That's going to take 5 hours to be fully sober. If you fall asleep with a much higher BAC, let's say a 0.24, that would be in that red zone that we were looking at before. It wouldn't be until 3 p.m. the next day, if you fell asleep at midnight, that you'd be sober. And we talk to students about how that can be associated with risk reduction. If someone's doing the right thing, they got too intoxicated, and they want to sleep over a friend's house, what if the next morning they decide to drive, right? We talk to students about, wow, you could actually be intoxicated into that next day, and how to look out for each other if you are making the decision to drink, and make sure that you're safe even into the next day if you are making that decision. Speaking of sleep, so most students, if they are making the decision to drink, are doing a lot of that sobering up while they're sleeping. So how we know alcohol impacts sleep is it impacts your REM sleep. So REM sleep is rapid eye movement sleep. It's when you're dreaming. But it's also when your immune system is revitalizing. It's when your muscle growth is developing, and when your short-term memory is processing over to long-term memory. So basically, if you get good REM sleep, you're going to be feeling refreshed and ready to go that next day. However, if you drink alcohol or smoke marijuana or use marijuana before falling asleep, it increases the likelihood that you're not going to get REM sleep, because while your body is processing those substances out of its system, you can't get into rapid eye movement sleep. So that student is much more likely to wake up during the night and to wake up feeling tired, groggy, irritable, restless, or anxious, especially if students already have some type of anxiety or know that they are someone who isn't a morning person, right? We always talk to students about knowing how drinking or smoking the night before can impact them into that next day. And it goes even beyond just that next day. So one night of lack of REM sleep because you're either drinking or smoking actually can impact 2 to 3 days after the fact because your body goes into what's called REM rebound the next night. You actually get too much REM sleep, but that's not great for your body either because you're still waking up kind of tired, groggy, irritable, restless, anxious potentially because you didn't get enough of the other stages then too. So if you're drinking or smoking on a Saturday, we talk to students about, hey, if you know you have an exam on that Monday, drinking on a Saturday could actually impact you beyond just that next Sunday, which I think is surprising for students and can be something that's interesting for them to tuck in their back pocket and really use to reduce their risk if they are making the decision to smoke or drink. So this is my favorite part to talk about students, how they can reduce their risk if they are making the decision to drink or use marijuana. A lot of these are associated with alcohol. One of these would be just figuring out what your BAC is. If your goal is to stay in that green zone and not be experiencing the impairment and the depressant effects of alcohol, it's really easy for students to be able to do that. All they have to do is, on their phone or ahead of time, go into bloodalcoholcalculator.org and really plan out your night, okay? In order to stay in the green zone, I know I want to stick to a limit of 3 standard drinks, let's say. And we actually know that the majority of Northeastern students are drinking more moderately when they do decide to drink. So that's another really cool thing that our data has showed us over the years. Setting limits is important and being really specific about those limits. Instead of saying, oh, well, I'm just not going to get drunk tonight. Saying, I'm going to stick to 2 drinks and keep track of your drinks in order to make sure that you're hitting that limit that you feel comfortable with. We talked about that time is the only thing that will sober you up. And also, if you look at a bacalculator.org, if you have 2 drinks in under an hour, that's going to lead your BAC to be much higher than if you have 2 drinks over 2 hours and are really spacing them out. So time makes a huge difference. We talk to students about time being a really important thing if they do make the decision to drink. Another really good way to space out your night is by using water. So water is great. Alcohol dehydrates you. Water is going to rehydrate you. So you want to have 8 ounces of water for every standard drink that you consume. But water is also really good, like we talked about, to pace out your night and to spread out the time that you're drinking. We also talk to students about avoiding mixing alcohol with caffeine. That's because caffeine is a stimulant, alcohol is a depressant. So that stimulant of the caffeine, if you're drinking something like a vodka Red Bull, for example, is going to wear away much faster than alcohol does. And so you might be feeling not the full effects of that alcohol until that caffeine wears away, leading you to potentially feel much more intoxicated than you wanted to that night. This often comes up, avoiding alcohol and other drug interactions, for something as simple as aspirin, for example. Even something that's over the counter, aspirin can actually thin out your blood and raise your BAC, making you feel more intoxicated even after you stopped drinking. Another drug interaction that we talk to students about is alcohol and marijuana. So both of those substances are depressants. So it's not just one depressant plus one depressant equals 2. So I'll probably be feeling double the effects. The risk is going to go way up whenever you're mixing substances, and the predictability is going to go way down. So students could sometimes feel triple, quadruple the depressant effects. There's just no way to know. We always talk to students about what to do if they're concerned about themselves or a friend. And Northeastern has a great policy. It's called the Medical Amnesty Policy. It's a really important policy that we share with all Northeastern students throughout the year and at orientation as well. We give them NUPD's phone number and let them know that they can call at any time for any reason if they're concerned about themselves or a friend. And if they are calling for medical amnesty, they're not going to get in trouble with any official sanctions through the university. So that's a really good incentive for students to look out for each other and take care of each other, specifically if they do have concerns or if someone is more intoxicated than someone or a friend may feel comfortable with. We also talk to students about, hey, these are some warning signs to look for if a friend is too intoxicated by alcohol or other drugs. Because a lot of people think, hey, I don't want to call medical amnesty because I don't want to get my friend in trouble. That's actually not the number one deterrent that we hear from calling. It's just, I don't know what the signs are. So we do a very good job kind of making sure that all students know what those signs are, what to look for, and how to call when you're concerned. So I've spoken a lot about how alcohol impacts the body. Given, obviously, the legal climate that we have right now and the recent passing of recreational use of marijuana in Massachusetts, I do want to highlight a couple points about how marijuana impacts the body as well. So especially when I talk to parents, oftentimes I'll hear, well, I smoked in college and it was totally fine. And that could absolutely be true. But we know that the marijuana THC content right now is vastly different than what it used to be. This chart actually shows that the THC content has drastically increased. And where this data comes from is when marijuana is seized, it goes to a lab in Mississippi. And they actually look at what that THC content, and it has just been rising over the past years. So I think that's very important when we talk to parents about, hey, this could be a very different substance than it used to be, and that people maybe even understand. Because research is still coming out over what we know about this new level of THC with marijuana, and specifically how it impacts our students. What we do know, what research has shown us specifically around how marijuana affects the body, we know that it mostly impairs coordination, reaction time, problem solving, and negatively impacts perception and attention. Those are all things that we want our college students to be really good at, right? So these are huge things that we talk to students about. Hey, these are the risks that can be associated with smoking. Specifically, we know that research found that in all three areas, attention, concentration, and memory can still be impacting students even 24 hours after last use. So it's not that students just don't have attention or concentration or memory when they're actively high. This is 100% something that can still be impacting students into the next day. And students may not be aware of that. So making sure that we're taking the time to educate students and parents about the long-lasting effects of smoking. We also know that research suggests that students who smoked did have noticeable deficits in verbal learning, verbal working memory, and attention. And as you can see, attention does seem to be the most impacted by marijuana use, and attention deficits can be shown if a student is smoking marijuana even 3 weeks after the fact. So that's beyond just that 24-hour window that we were looking at in the last slide. And specifically, if your student does struggle with attention difficulties, just as a baseline, this is something that's really important for them to be aware of if they are making the decision to smoke. We also know that marijuana impacts the hippocampus, which directly impacts motivation. And like I mentioned, marijuana has a huge impact on REM sleep. And research isn't quite sure exactly how long it takes to sober up, like we do have with alcohol, just because research hasn't kind of addressed that yet. We're hoping that that is something that comes out, but for now, we just don't quite know. So we're talking to students about, hey, if you do smoke marijuana before you're falling asleep, that could absolutely impact you into the next day or days afterwards. And if you are someone who's finding it difficult to stay motivated, stay on top of your classes, stay organized, and you are choosing to smoke marijuana, how those two things could be potentially making classes or academics even more difficult. We also absolutely talk to students about considering the effects that marijuana may have on mental health considerations. So research does suggest that students who use marijuana 10 times or more by the age of 18 were 2 times more likely to be diagnosed with schizophrenia if there is a family history of schizophrenia. So we specifically want to talk to students who may have specific family history risks or may have a unique risk specifically around mental health, just to let them know, hey, this is something that can come up, and if you are making the decision to smoke, this could be potentially how it may be impacting you in a unique way. Finally, the last thing that I like to share with students and that I like to share with parents about risks associated with marijuana is specifically when it comes to consuming edibles. We've seen a lot of students who have noticed more of those negative reactions when consuming edibles because there is no standard serving size. That makes it really hard to know what you're consuming or how much THC is in whatever it is that you're consuming. It also takes longer to feel the effects. So if you're smoking, you can feel the effects in 30 minutes to an hour. It can take a lot longer, let's say more than 1 or 2 hours, to feel the effects of marijuana that you're consuming in an edible or a drink or something like that. So students who may say, I'm not really feeling it yet, may take more and then end up feeling way more than they intended. Like we said, effects from smoking can last into the next day. Effects from something like an edible can last even longer. And then we've also seen a greater risk of temporary acute psychosis, panic attacks, and vomiting. And these would all be things that if students are noticing in themselves or a friend, we would encourage that they call for medical amnesty, make sure that they're getting connected to NUPD and getting help if some of those things are coming up for them. So this is where you all come in. I spent a lot of time talking about kind of how alcohol and marijuana affect the body, but we know that parents play a huge role when it comes to making sure that students are reducing their risk if they are making the decision to drink. So by no means am I here to tell you what you should or shouldn't be doing or how you should talk to your students, but we know absolutely that research tells us this is a huge part where parents have an awesome impact on their college students. So I encourage you to think about some of the suggestions that I'll be offering and see how they might fit with your own family or your own students. So some of you may remember some of this information. This is absolutely information that we share with parents in orientation. So if you do remember it, awesome. I'd like to encourage you to think of it as a refresher. If you don't remember or you haven't seen our orientation presentation, awesome. This is absolutely a way that research has shown you all can be super effective when it comes to preventing risk. Most of the research that we currently have around how parents can be partners in prevention is specifically regarding alcohol. So I just wanted to mention that really quickly, but I'm hoping that some of these strategies are strategies that you can use not only by talking to your students about alcohol, but also any other substances that they may be using, like marijuana. So what this first slide is talking about is that parents have a huge impact on their children's behavior, and that's specifically around just making sure that you're kind of in contact with your students. So this study specifically talks about non-specific contact, so not grilling your student on, are you drinking, are you using other substances, but having general conversation about how things are going, how are your roommates, how are your classes, those types of things. I love this slide. We show it in orientation. You might remember it. It's an idea about how it can be sometimes hard to talk to your students, right? A lot of students will say, or a lot of parents will say, will they listen to me? Will they feel engaged? How do I actually start that conversation? So I'm going to be sharing resources at the end of this presentation, but we know that parents have a huge impact when it comes to maintaining general communication with students. That general communication absolutely does reduce high-risk substance use. And the degree to which parents do ask their students about specific things around their alcohol or other substance use. Hey, where do you go at night? What do you do with your free time? And what does their drinking look like? Those are all things that have actually shown if parents are talking to students about, that actually reduce student risk and can take them from a high-risk drinking group to a lower-risk drinking group, or keep them at a light to a no-risk drinking group as well. So that's huge. This is another thing that we know absolutely impacts college student drinking. So the degree to which parents are permissive about drinking, and that could be before students head out to college and also when you're having those conversations with students. So the degree to which students see you as lenient regarding alcohol use, or kind of what they think is okay in your eyes as parents. We know that the lower a parent's permissiveness associated with drinking is, so that it's not okay in your eyes, or that permissiveness is on the lower end, that's actually associated with less risky drinking. So again, this is not an area where I'm telling you how you should talk to your students about alcohol or some of the views that you may have. But we do know through research that this is a place where practice does not make perfect. And we talk to parents about really talking to students about drinking and sending the message that it's not okay in your eyes, or that the permissiveness is low. Another very cool thing is we know that students, if their parents talk to them about drinking before they head to college, that actually does reduce their risk. They're more likely to fall in a non-drinking or light drinking category. And again, if they are in a high-risk drinking category, they're more likely to transition out of that category. So the cool thing is you can have a conversation before your student goes to college. I know it's the spring semester, so we know that not just that before college conversation matters. Now's the time to talk to your students about alcohol or other drugs like marijuana. And we know that another conversation, once that student's already in college, can be just as effective. And research would suggest that as well. So we always encourage parents, even if you're not quite sure how to have the conversation, we have resources for how to have that conversation. Even if you haven't had it before college, think about having that now with your college students. So I've been mentioning the resources that we have for parents. We are so proud of the resources that we have on our website and the resources that we have available for parents. This is the only evidence-based manual that we have for talking to college students about alcohol. It really minimizes that lecture trap or that judgmental conversation, and it opens up dialogue between you and your students about some of the things that we've talked about, right? That general communication, how to talk to your students in a way that will make them less defensive and more open to thinking about what they want their own use to look like, and having that open line of communication with you as parents. Some of you may have already gotten this manual. We have printed copies in orientation, but if you didn't, no worries. You can get it at studentlife.northeastern.edu/open. It's right on our front page. We also know that other states are farther ahead in their legalization of marijuana, and so they have more evidence-based research around how to talk to children, how to talk to teens and college students about marijuana use specifically. So I love this website. This is from Washington, who is farther along in their legalization process than Massachusetts. And so they have some really cool resources specifically for parents. Just go to learnaboutmarijuana.wa.org/parents. And you can find information specifically about how to talk to your students about marijuana. So that's resources for both alcohol and marijuana to just start that conversation. We also have, if you go to our website, this is a screenshot of our website, about how you all can be partners in prevention with our office. We also cover, besides just alcohol and other drug education, we do sexual violence prevention and response, and we also talk to students about healthy relationships, consent, and sexual health. So we love talking to students about those general wellness topics, and we have a lot of information, not only for alcohol and other drugs, how to talk to students about those topics, but how to talk about the other topics that we talk to students about, so that if they have seen a presentation in one of their freshman seminar classes, and they have questions that they might bring up with you, you can feel prepared with maybe things other than alcohol or other drugs, including healthy relationships, consent, or how to support your students. So this is how you can stay in touch with myself and with our office. The best way to contact us is just open@northeastern.edu. You can call us and you can visit our website, and I sure hope you do, because we have a lot more information than even I was able to share with you this evening. And this is another way that you can stay connected to family programs as well.
Thank you so much, Abby. That was very informative. At this time, we'd like to begin taking questions from our audience. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A pod. We do have a couple coming in. Abby, you gave some really good information tonight and resources where parents go. How do students know about this, and how do they hear about the programs?
Yeah, that's a great question. We, like I said, mention a lot of this information, specifically around how to reduce your risk. In general, alcohol education, like what a standard drink is. In orientation. We also talk to students about warning signs and how to look out for one another if they do make the decision to drink. And we talk to students in orientation about, hey, not everyone is drinking or using other substances on campus. So if you're coming to Northeastern, welcome. As if you are a student who's not drinking or using other substances, don't worry, you're not the only one who's making that decision, and that there's a group of students here who you'll be able to fit in and kind of make relationships with that may not have anything to do with alcohol or substances. Another place besides just orientation that we talk to students about is freshman seminars. We talk to student groups, we talk to a lot of freshman seminars on their welcome days, and we bring speakers to campus throughout the year that all students are invited to. So we try to get this information out to students as much as possible, the general population, and we're also having individual meetings with students who may have specific questions or concerns or who have had an incident with alcohol and other drugs on campus. So that's another really individualized way that we can give students personalized information about how to reduce their own risk.
And you had mentioned this information is given out at orientation. What happens like when they take their co-op class? Do students who are in junior years and senior years ever have to get this information again, or is it up to them to kind of seek it out?
That's a great question. A lot of students may get this information if they are an upperclassmen through the student groups that they may join. So Northeastern has so many student groups, and that's another really cool way that we're reaching upperclassmen in that if they are involved in student groups or if they're in a fraternity or sorority or another group that may be different than just a freshman 101 course, then we actually enter into these groups at various times throughout a student's experience to just do refresher reminders around, hey, how do you reduce your risk and how can we look out for each other? So although upperclassmen may not be getting that kind of like intro refresher, they might have gotten it as freshmen, and they surely got it when they entered into Northeastern during orientation. There are always opportunities. They can also come to events that we put on and speakers that may be talking about alcohol or other drugs on campus. So students do have the opportunity to get that information in various ways, even when they are upperclassmen.
So we have a question. This is kind of an interesting one. We know vaping is on the rise, especially here in Massachusetts.
Yep.
So what are your thoughts on that, and how do we share information about vaping to students?
That's a great question, and we 100% have noticed an increase with vaping on our campus and with our students. And so we just try to be really upfront with what the risks are. I think that vaping can seem to a lot of students like it's not that risky. Some students we know through research actually aren't even sure what is in vaping when they do vape. Some students think it's just water vapor. So it's really important to let them know this is nicotine. And we actually know that one pod, for example, a Juul pod, is equal to 20 cigarettes, the nicotine in 20 cigarettes. And so really talking about, hey, what is nicotine as a substance? This is a chemical that can absolutely impact your brain development. And if you are choosing to use it, how do you reduce your risk? We also talk to students who want to quit vaping but aren't quite sure what the resources are. So I feel really lucky out of University Health and Counseling Services, which is where students can go for physical or mental health concerns. They have a really cool program called Ready to Quit that offers customized individual support and group support for students who do want to quit. We also have medically assisted ways of quitting too. Students can get the patch or something like that. That our campus is really kind of at the forefront of talking to students about, hey, if you're thinking about quitting, these are some ways that where you can maybe feel ready to. Or if you've already made that decision, these are some ways that you can set in stone and kind of stick to that commitment of quitting. And it's not just for cigarettes. We definitely see students who are interested in using those types of prevention and risk reduction strategies for vaping specifically.
I know there's a little controversy where they were shutting down some of the businesses in Boston. Is vaping legal? I mean, can they do it on campus?
Yeah, no, they can't. So we are a smoke-free campus, and if people are vaping on campus, it's the responsibility of NUPD and staff and faculty members to make sure that students are aware that it is not something that is acceptable on our campus.
Abby, you talked a lot about alcohol and marijuana use, and having marijuana be legal in Massachusetts. How does Northeastern deal with this?
That's a great question. A lot of students have questions about this too. So we do a really we make a very strict effort to make sure that students are aware. First of all, just because marijuana is legal for those who are 21 and older in Massachusetts, because Northeastern receives federal funding and marijuana is not federally legal, that makes a marijuana use against the Code of Conduct for Northeastern students. So that is printed really clearly in the Code of Conduct, but it can be confusing. So we always clarify that with students in orientations to make sure that they're aware of how they're going to be held accountable at Northeastern. It's not allowed to have on campus or to use in res halls. And even students who are 21 and older, it is against the Code of Conduct. So we make that clear to students because I think it can be confusing, specifically with marijuana being legal in the state of Massachusetts.
So we have time for one or two more questions. I'll give it a minute to see if any questions come through. And in the meantime, I do want you to know that we did record this session and it will be available on our website probably by Monday of next week. So if you ever want to go back and listen to the recording or share it with your students, please feel free to do so. So at this time, we are not receiving any more questions. We do have the contact information up on the screen for the Family Programs Office. If you do have a question for Abby, please feel free to email parents@northeastern.edu, and we will be sure to forward that to her. I do thank you all for joining us tonight. In closing, shortly I'm going to send out a survey. If you wouldn't mind taking a few minutes just to give us feedback on tonight's session and any future topic sessions that you'd like to see in the future. Again, thank you for joining us, and we'll have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone.